Hey guys, I'm Kodi Quinlisk with Steel Green Manufacturing. Today we're going to talk about the spray system on your Steel Green sprayer. We're going to cover the suction system, the pressure system, the return system, as well as troubleshooting a few items and how to backflush your tanks. So the first step of your spray system begins in the bottom of the tank. That's where the sump is located. All of the liquid is directed right into that sump. Located in the bottom of that sump is your suction fitting. What this fitting is going to do, it has an anti-vortex on the top of it. So this keeps the air from getting into the hose as you pull the liquid level down towards the bottom of the tank. This little device here is what enables our machines to be able to pull almost all of the liquid out of the tanks. So another feature of this anti-vortex fitting is that it has this quick release pin that you can take out and the elbow comes off the bottom. This is going to let you drain your tanks quickly and easily with minimum tools. So from this elbow, you're going to have a hose that comes up inside the machine, and it's going to go to a hose that is right between these two suction valves. There's a valve here on this side of the machine. There's also a valve on the other side of the machine. These valves are going to dictate which tank that your pump is pulling product from. All right, so you have a hose that comes up to these valves on each side, and then you'll see that there's a crossover hose that connects the valves to each other. That hose is what allows you to be able to pull from both tanks at the same time. From there, at this T, it's going to come down to this valve here. The purpose of this valve is to be able to shut off the liquid supply that's going to your chemical strainer. So when you stop to clean out your filter, you can shut this valve off and then begin to take your filter apart. It's going to keep all that excess chemical from leaking out on you. So inside this strainer bowl here, you're going to find a 50 mesh screen. This is going to stop any debris that could get to your spray tips. So after your chemical leaves the strainer, it's going to follow this hose and it's going to come up to the pump. That concludes the suction side of the system. The liquid's then going to go into the pump and the pump's going to pressurize it. Once it starts to pressurize it, it's going to push it through this hose and right up to the manifold. The manifold's going to retain that pressure, and depending on which valve you have open, it's going to send it out the boom to the boom hoses. You have 3 different valves to dictate which section of the boom you want to use. So once that hose comes down and comes out here onto the boom, you have a nozzle body. So inside this nozzle body, you have a check valve in here that's rated at about 15 PSI. So this is what lets you be able to turn your sprayer on and off without opening and closing the levers up on the dash. Just by turning your pump on and off, when the pressure drops below 15 PSI, this is going to close and that's going to stop your nozzles from dripping. As well as the check valve, you also have a screen that's inside the tip itself. So this screen also has a small check ball in it that's rated at about 3 PSI. So that's going to keep that final little bit from dripping after you shut your nozzles off. And the last thing that we get to is the spray tip itself. So the spray tip, our standard tip, is a lavender colored tip. It's rated for 1/3 of a gallon per 1,000. Okay, so your return system starts with the pressure control knob. The flow is going to come down through here. It's going to go to another crossover tube. It's going to go to a return valve on both sides of the machine. This is going to dictate any product that didn't go out of the nozzles has to go somewhere. So this valve here is going to determine where that product's going to go. You want that to go to the same tank that you're pulling the product from. So these 2 valves should always work together. If one is on, the other should be on as well. So now that we've covered the 3 main parts to the spray system, I want to talk a little bit about troubleshooting some of the common issues that some people see within their spray system. And now that we have a better understanding of how everything works, it's going to help us figure out what could possibly be going wrong. So one of the common issues is a machine that won't prime. So that's when you turn on your spray pump and you have your suction and return valves open and you kick the pump on and it just won't build any pressure at all. No matter what you do with your pressure control knob, you won't be able to build pressure. So what you want to do in that case is back off this pressure control knob to 0 PSI. It's going to give you the maximum flow back to your tanks, which is going to help push any air out of that system. Some of the other issues that can cause a machine to not prime is if your main chemical filter down here is clogged up. If you're running products like prodiamine, some other stuff like that that has a tendency to settle out, it could then plug up that main chemical strainer. Once you run the tanks out of liquid and you go to fill them up again, it can sometimes cause it to not get enough flow to be able to prime up properly. An air leak in that system can also cause the same thing. An air leak on the suction side, if it's a big enough air leak, it's just going to pull air in instead of liquid. That could generally happen if a machine gets really cold and freezes. It can happen at the chemical strainer. It could be a loose hose fitting. It can also happen out here at your pump fitting as well. The last thing that it could be would be a clog. If you're, again, some of those products, they can settle out in your tank. If the machine has been parked for a few weeks, and if you didn't get all the product out of there, it can settle down on the anti-vortex in the bottom of the tank. Once that product sets on there, it'll kind of harden up and it'll keep it from being able to pull liquid into the pump. So another issue that you might come across is if your machine won't maintain a steady pressure. So if you set your pressure at 40 and you're out spraying, if you see it, bouncing from 35 to 45 or just bouncing all around, just not holding within 1 to 2 psi, there's a good chance that you might have an air leak on the suction side. That could be at your chemical strainer, could be at a hose fitting, could be numerous places. But most of our issues that we see out of our spray system is going to be a result of an issue on the suction side of the pump. The other thing that it could possibly be when your pressure is kind of bouncing around, it could be a bad electrical connection to your pump to where it's getting a good connection and then it loses it. So therefore the RPMs of the pump is changing. Those typically are the two issues we see if the machine is building pressure, but it just won't hold steady pressure. So another thing you might see is if you've been out spraying quite a bit and then you get to a property and you know it's going to take a certain amount of product, you finish up that property and you have extra product left over. Typically this is caused by an issue on the pressure side of the system, and that being the tips, the screens that are in the spray tips, or a blockage, something of that sort, where you know that you ran at the pressure you needed to, but there's just a restriction not allowing the product to go from the pressure gauge and get out of the spray tips. So typically if you see an issue where after you've done a calibration, you're going to be a little bit light, you're not going to be catching as much as what you need, it's a good indication that the tips, the screens inside the spray tips are clogged. And the last issue we want to talk about today is if you get in a scenario where your pressure is just too high. So once you kick on your pump, your pressure goes up to 70 plus PSI, and no matter what you do, you can't get that pressure to come back down. This is always an issue with the return side of the system. If you encounter that, be sure that your return valves on the side of the dash are on and open. So that way any product that's left over that's not going out your boom can make it back into the tanks. If it can't make it back to the tanks, that's going to cause the excess pressure that you're seeing on the gauge. Another thing that we've recently ran into is we've had some customers that have started putting some agitators inside their tanks, and they just put them right on the return fitting inside the tank. An issue that can cause, if not done properly, is the high spray pressure. So the machine will build too high of pressure and you can't get rid of that pressure. So therefore you have no control over it. It just maxes out your pressure. So just be cautious of putting anything on the fittings inside your tanks. All right, guys, now that we've covered the three main parts of the spray system, as well as troubleshooting some of the issues, common issues that guys are seeing, now I want to show you how to backflush your tanks. By backflushing your tanks, you're going to be able to find some of those common issues. Okay, so the only thing that you're going to need to backflush your tanks is a flathead screwdriver and a water supply. So the first thing you're going to want to do is fill up your tanks to where the liquid level is above the return fitting in the side of the tank. The whole process, what we're going to do, we're going to switch our hoses on the pump. So we're going to move the suction hose to the pressure side. We're going to move the pressure hose to the suction side. What this is going to do, it's going to pull liquid from the fitting in the side of the tank. It's going to run it through the manifold, and it's going to push it out the fitting in the bottom of the tank. So if you have any clog in the bottom of the tank, this is a way to backflush that and get that product out of there. So first thing we're going to do is fill that tank up, and then we're going to have to switch these hoses over. So these have a quick release pin. You pull both of these loose, the fitting comes out. You take the screwdriver and you just loosen the hose clamp, and then this fitting will turn the opposite way, and you can just tighten it back down. So we're going to do the same thing with the other side. We're going to loosen that hose clamp, pull it out, and turn it the opposite way, and be sure to tighten it back down again. So now that we have that done, we're just going to take this hose right into this side of the pump, and this hose is going to go right into the other side of the pump. So depending on what model machine you have and if you have dual pumps, you may need to unbolt the pump itself and turn them both around in order for your hoses to reach. But now that we got everything turned around, we can back our pressure knob here off to 0 PSI, because this is now going to be on the suction side. So once you have that backed off, you can kick your pump on and you're just going to watch inside your tank. You're going to look for any bubbles or any debris to come up from the bottom of the tank. Now, while you're doing this, you want to make sure your boom levers are off and that your hose reel valve is off also. You'll let the machine run one tank at a time, so suction and return for this tank both on. Let it run for a couple minutes and then shut this tank off here and turn on your other tank and let it do the same thing. Again, make sure both tanks have enough water in them that it's above the return fitting in the side of the tank. While it's flushing out the tanks and you're looking for debris, you're also going to want to check underneath your knee pad, take this off, and you're going to want to check all the hoses under here, and you're going to want to check around the chemical strainer as well. You're looking for any drips, any sprays, anything like that. If any of the issues that you had prior, if you believe that they were an air leak, you will now see liquid spraying from a hose or dripping or something of that sort. So typically in the spring, if there's any chance the machine could have frozen, this is the best way to find any potential air leaks, is by pressurizing the suction side of the system. So that concludes how to backflush your tanks, and just wanted to show you guys the easiest way to find some of those common issues that we see when it comes to your spray system. So if you have any questions at all about how to backflush your machine, or if you've done it and it's just not working out for you, feel free to reach out to us on social media, give us a call, or contact us through our website at steelgreenmanufacturing.com.